No noise out there.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the ITM Power half-year results investor presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted anytime via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. I'd also like to remind you this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Dr. Graham Cooley, CEO, and Andy Allen, CFO of ITM Power. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this interim results presentation. And also welcome to Bessemer Park, the world's largest electrolyser factory. So I'm really delighted that we're able to give this presentation from the factory. It's a marvelous moment for the company to have moved into the factory and to have started production. And in fact, we have one unit on the shop floor, which is going to be delivered in the next couple of days. It's going to Australia, and then another 2 units over the next couple of weeks going to projects in the UK. So a marvelous moment for the company. And just one very simple thing before we start. We're going to talk to you about revenue numbers, about backlog, and about the number of tenders we've made over the last 12 months. But it's really what happens behind me here in this factory and with this technology center that's the future of the company. So, okay, if you could just share the slides, please, we'll carry on with the presentation. So the interim results presentation then for the period ended October 2020. And I'm going to be presenting this with Andy Allen, our Chief Financial Officer. So first of all, a short description of our achievements over the last 12 months. So we've now achieved a record backlog announced this morning of 124 million. I think that the most important change in the backlog is the composition of the backlog. And we have actually moved many of the contracts that were in negotiation to under contract. And we've concentrated on that in the period. We've also reported a very significant increased tender pipeline. So the tender pipeline are those quotations we've made against commercial tenders over the last 12 months. And the last time we reported it was in October. That was 325 million. Today it stands at 435 million. So we've increased the number of tenders we've made jointly with Linde by 100 million over the last 4 months. We also in October announced a fundraise of 172 million. It was a very successful fundraise, was 2.5 times oversubscribed, and we got a strategic investment from SNAM of 30 million. Of course, moving into the new factory has been a very significant activity for ITM Power, and we've done that with the backdrop of COVID, and I think we've done that very successfully. We made a sale announced only a few days ago to Linde of a 24 megawatt electrolyser, and it's the world's largest PEM electrolyser, going into the heartland of German industry in Leuna. We're also working very closely with Phillips 66 and Ørsted on the 100 megawatt feed study. We also announced a strategic partnership with Scottish Power in Scotland, an initiative called Green Hydrogen for Scotland. So I think we've been seeing some very significant momentum in all of our key markets, particularly working closely with Linde Engineering. So the factory then, 2 points to add about the factory. The first is that we raised enough money in the funding round to be able to develop a second gigafactory, that actually could be larger than this first gigafactory when we get to the point where this factory is 60% full. And we also raised money for inventory. So we have enough working capital to hold inventory so that we reduce our lead times down to less than 8 months, which is very important when we're looking at tendering and converting tenders into contracts. So what does the move actually mean? Well, the most significant part of the move is the way that it unlocks scale for ITM Power. We have moving from Atlas Way to Bessemer Park gives us production capacity increase of tenfold. Actually, when you look at the constraints in Atlas Way, the constraints of ATEX testing and also the power supply, the effective capacity increase is actually 30 times. We also have increased our IT capabilities, and we've increased our connectivity also by a factor of 10, which means that we're looking at the ability for 24-hour monitoring, not just in the UK, but genuinely worldwide. And we have enough space now for 320 staff and also a marketing center, which you'll see in the video at the end, which gives us the ability to do conferences and hold world-class meetings. So we're moving up in module size. We're moving from 2 megawatt modules to 5 megawatt modules. And we're working very closely with Linde Engineering to pre-engineer 20 megawatt packages. The reason for pre-engineering the balance of plant is so that you can do projects without the need for non-recurring engineering costs and designing the same thing over and over again. It also allows you to get efficiencies in the supply chain. And actually, one of the rationales for our collaboration with Linde is the P part of the EPC. That's engineering, procurement, and construction. And of course, Linde have very, very strong purchasing power. So by pre-engineering the balance of plant, you can get great efficiencies in procurement. So what does the full system look like? What you see in front of you is a 100 megawatt plant. It's the output of some feed studies we've been doing. You see a full power system, control system, water system, and gas system. And the balance of plant is engineered by Linde, and all the stacks manufactured in the factory that you see behind me. When I quote you prices, this is very important because we're talking about fully integrated systems that are turnkey. And many of the companies you see quoting prices in the market are only quoting prices for stacks. Ours is a full system cost. So the Leuna plant then, a fantastic moment for ITM. We announced the Shell project, and at 10 megawatts, that was the world's largest PEM electrolyzer at the time. We've now announced Leuna, 24 megawatts, the next world's largest PEM electrolyzer. It's the first genuine project through ILE with a balance of plant fully engineered by Linde, and it's a very, very important reference plant in the German chemicals industry. So in terms of cost reduction then, currently we are quoting electrolyzers at 10 megawatts or above at 0.8 million euros a megawatt. And we have a very ambitious cost reduction curve that we're actually tracking ahead of right now. We are targeting in the next 3 to 4 years, 100 megawatt plant at €500,000 a megawatt. And as I said, we're tracking ahead of that because of the work we're doing with Linda in balance of plant, the scaling of the electrolyzer modules, and also the volumes that we're expecting through the factory. Already at €0.8 million a megawatt at the 10 megawatt level, we are cost competitive with any other form of electrolyzer technology. So my last slide then, before I hand over to Andy, just wanted to make quick reference to the Oyster project, which we announced a couple of weeks ago. It's a follow-on project with Ørsted and our first project with Siemens Gamesa, and it's funded by the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking of the EU. And it's about integrating electrolysis equipment with wind turbines. And wind turbines have a control system and a power system, and so do electrolyzers. And so it's about the integration of those two components at the power and control level. We're also very interested in deriving our clean water from seawater, both for offshore deployments and also onshore deployments in countries where that's the best way of accessing water. And so the project is going to integrate on 3 levels: on the level of the wind turbine, the electrolyzer, and also the desalination unit. So perhaps now I can hand over to our finance director, Andy Allen, who will take you through the results. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Graham. Hello, everybody. I will talk you through the 6-month results to the end of October and talk about the results snapshot, also show you some key metrics for us and talk about the backlog. Just before we go off this slide, you see a different angle of Bessemer Park, which is actually the far end of the factory to where Graham's sitting right now, which is a bank of CNC machines which produce components for our stacks. We've moved in over Christmas and at the start of January, done some commissioning, and these are now in production as of this week. So in terms of the financial results, our total income was £4.4 million, which was up 16%. Now, our revenue recognition rules are such that we actually recognise revenue once all of our obligations are completed on site. And so there has been an impact from the COVID pandemic, which looks at being about £3 million. So I would have been reporting about 100% increase year on year had it not been for that impact. In terms of the EBITDA loss, it's 10.4 million in the period against 8.1 last year. The main increases there is people and building in skills and capability ready for Bessemer Park, but also the fact that we've been running Bessemer Park alongside the 2 existing factories that we had. And now we're all under one roof and we're in the process of closing out the leases on the old factories. In terms of the balance sheet, we have a cash balance of 25.9 million at the period end. That was before the fundraise where the proceeds came to us in November. So at the end of November, we had 192.9 million pounds. We had a cash burn in the period of 14 million against 6 million last year. The main difference there is being Bessemer Park, 5.7 million on the fit out, further £1 million on the equipment within Bessemer Park. And then we've also been buying inventory for standard products to speed up that lead time, as Graham said. So 2 key metrics for us, EBITDA and cash. And there are a number of factors influencing these 2 metrics, and they're on this slide here. So on the left-hand side, you've got an EBITDA bridge, which last year was 8.1 million loss, and in October 2020 was a 10.4 million loss. And there's 4 factors there. The first orange box is overruns associated with on-site works. We've confirmed that actually these legacy projects where there's EPC elements are all going to be closed out in this current financial year, with the exception of Refine, which will be producing its first hydrogen in Q2. We've had a slight reduction in grant income of 0.3 million, and we've invested in people and capabilities at 0.8 million pound difference in the period. And then the final bit is the impact of running Bessemer Park alongside the other two factories, and that's about a £500,000 impact. In terms of cash, on the right-hand side, we started the period with 39.9 million, and you can see we ended it with 25.9. And there are a number of swings in the middle. So the operating cash flows were 10.4 million pounds. We've improved our working capital position by 2.5 million, and we're getting more money in from debtors. We've invested in the JV 0.2 million, and we will continue to commit alongside Linda to make that JV work. And we are committed to another 1.4 million over the next 18 months or so. In terms of Bessemer Park and other capex, we spent 6.9 million in the period, and in H2 there's going to be between 3.5 and 4 million pounds further capex to have Bessemer Park fully up and running. And then finally, we've got the development of the next generation product, which Graham showed in an earlier slide. We've spent 0.7 million in the period on that. We've had some proceeds from sales of shares to leave us with 25.9 million at the period end. In terms of what's next for ITM Power, Graham's already showed you the backlog slide, 124 million pounds, up from 118.7 in October, only 3 months ago. But the big movement here is that we've got 36.1 million of contracted projects, up 144% since October 3 months ago. We've also we're starting to see the impact of the partnerships that we are developing in here. So the green bar is the SNAM preferred supplier contracts, and the grey and yellow bars under contracts and in negotiation include nearly 20 million pounds worth of Linde gas projects in there. And that's reflected in geography as well. So you can see that the SNAM projects are in Italy, but we have other projects in Germany, in our home market, the UK, but also where we have representatives in France and Australia. And so across all applications that the company is interested in, and the other balance is the amounts for R&D and for developing our next generation products. So I'll hand back over to Graham for the tender pipeline.
So thanks for that, Andy. Could you hand the slide controller back to me, please? So thank you. So that's great. Thanks very much. So in terms of the tender pipeline, as I mentioned before, the tender pipeline is the number of fixed price turnkey quotations that we've made against commercial tenders over the last 12 months. And last time we reported was in October, and that was 325 million. It's now 435 million. So it's up by 100 million in the last 4 months. You can see in the diagram a blue bar and an orange bar. The blue bar is the ITM portion, and the orange bar is Linde's EPC portion. And that's broadly broken down to 65-35, with 65% of those revenues would be to ITM Power, just under 300 million. These numbers don't include feasibility and FEED studies, and they also don't include the wider business development activity. So these are just where there is a commercial tender and there's a competitive process, and we've quoted against and in that competitive process. Where are they and in what markets? So the biggest market is energy, nearly half of all of those tenders. There's a great activity in the area of energy applications and power to gas energy storage. Next largest is industry and industrial chemistry. That would be refineries, ammonia and methanol production. And then also there's some in mobility. And mobility would be potentially smaller packaged units rather than the very large projects that you get in industrial, in the industrial or the energy sectors. The other thing you can see from this is that we are bidding in many more territories than we had done in the past. And it's important to stress that Linde are a global company. They're embedded in industries supplying grey hydrogen all over the world. And so it gives us much more reach than we had before in terms of business development. So just a quick summary then. We're in a very rapidly growing market that's at the multi-gigawatt scale. We have global leading position in technology and also manufacturing. We continue to transform the backlog and the pipeline, particularly working with our partners, particularly with Linde and with Shell and with Snam. And we were delighted to make the announcement of the world's largest PEM electrolyzer of 24 megawatts. We have the funds in place now to accelerate ITM so that we can capture this genuinely global opportunity. So look, we at the end of this presentation, we've got a film that we'd like to show you. It's a short film. It lasts less than 2 minutes. And the film was produced 3 months ago. So that was before the equipment was moved in November. And it was a film that was produced by our heating and ventilating engineers. And it shows much more of the factory that you can see than just this shot. So if we play the video, I think you'll get a very, very good understanding of the extent of the factory. Begins with the outside of the factory, and in the outside you could see the balance of plant test bays and the office block. You then go through the production floor and the test bays. You'll see the 4 megawatt ATEX rated test facility. You'll see all of the ducting above the technology center. And the reason for the ducting and all of the extraction is that they are clean rooms. You'll also see the marketing area, which is in a blue color. You'll see the welfare facilities. You'll see all of the facilities for staff. You'll see the deionized water supply, the full extraction from the factory and air circulation so that we comply with all of the rules in the factory. And at the end, it points out that it is a genuinely world-class installation. So would you like to play the film? That's great, thank you. So I think now Simon Hudson is going to be running through some of the questions.
That's fantastic. Dr. Cooley, Andy, thank you very, very much. And just before I hand over to Simon, ladies and gentlemen, do please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of the screen. But just while the company take a few moments to review those investor questions submitted already, I'd like to remind you that recording of the presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard on the Investor Meet Company platform. Lastly, before I hand back to the ITM Power team, I'd like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company. Immediately after the presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback in order the company can better understand your views and expectations. I'd now like to hand you over to Simon Hudson to pose questions to the ITM Power team where it's appropriate to do so. Simon, perhaps if I could ask you to start with the pre-submitted questions we've had from investors, and then may I ask you just to read out the questions where appropriate. That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. The first of the pre-registered questions is an obvious one. Graham, how many electrolyzers have you shipped from the new plant in Sheffield?
Yeah, so the first electrolyzer's going out, as I said, I think I said it right at the beginning, but an electrolyzer's going out in the next couple of days. I think it's Monday, and then there's a couple more going out over the next couple of weeks. And then it will be continuous from then.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, what's the largest output that can be achieved in cubic meters of hydrogen per hour? Can more cells be combined to increase output?
Yeah, I mean, the technology is entirely modular. So we make products that are 0.7, 1.4 and 2.1 megawatts in size as containerized products. Then we have a 2 megawatt module we call a cube, and a 5 megawatt cube that then go into larger installations with an EPC contract that is delivered by Linda. So it's all modular. You can add them together in blocks. We tend not to use a meters cubed per hour or per day measure. It's more accurate if you're using an electrolyzer to talk about the electrical load. So that's the way we specify it. But yeah, because the technology is modular, you just build them up in building blocks.
Okay. Question 3 is concerns the business opportunity that may exist with owners of gas-fired power stations to convert them to run on hydrogen or a mix of hydrogen and gas. Is this something you think you might be pursuing?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the whole principle of power to gas energy storage is to put hydrogen into the gas grid and then use it for whatever the gas then touches. And most of that actually for the UK gas grid will be heat, but some of it would be power generation as well. If you take a gas turbine, most around the world are still in warranty up to 20% hydrogen. So, and that's true as well of end user devices in a domestic environment as well. So you can put 20% hydrogen into the gas grid and not have to change any end user devices, including gas turbines. You could take the electrolyzer to the gas turbine and put 20% in directly, and you would just tee into the gas supply of the turbine. Most gas turbine manufacturers are making turbines that can take 60% hydrogen. That's actually a standard product. It's called a syngas turbine. And actually, you'll probably all know that we used to have 60% hydrogen in our gas grid prior to 1969. And that was because we used a form of syngas called town gas. So you can put 20% today in most gas turbines with those turbines still being in warranty and no loss of performance. If you want to put 60% into a gas turbine, you need to change the burners because the flame speed is different, or use a syngas turbine. And then many turbine manufacturers are working on 100% hydrogen turbines. And there are many projects around the world now looking at using green hydrogen in combination with turbines. The very shortest answer is yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. Last pre-registered question. When does the company expect to be cash neutral from operations?
Yeah, perhaps I can hand over to Andy to answer that one. Perhaps you can discuss what consensus looks like, Andy.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. We're now being covered by a number of analysts, and the consensus there is that it's 2024 for cash neutral.
Right. First of the questions from the meeting today. Could you give us some background, some detail on the after sales side of the business? How big is it, and what kind of percentage are you looking at for each electrolyzer?
Yeah, I mean, we are developing this part of the business very rapidly. We refer to it as ITM Power Support. We raise money to be able to put together a world-class package. We're extending our control room, which is going to be manned 24 hours a day, monitoring all of our products worldwide. We charge 3%, broadly 3%. Of the capital cost of the equipment as a charge per annum to look after the electrolysis equipment. So we're doing monitoring for preventative maintenance. We're also doing a lot of work with Linde on RAMs. So RAMs is reliability, availability, and maintainability. We work with them on building up a RAMs model of our technology, and also gathering data in the field to feed into that software. So short answer to the question, 3% of the capital cost of the equipment per annum as a charge to the customer.
Thank you. When Linde announces electrolyzer work, does Linde work with other electrolyzer companies? And a couple of examples quoted here from the agreement between CNOOC and Linde. Yeah,
so we have an agreement with Linde, which is ITM Linde Electrolysis. It's a 50-50 joint venture, and Linde provide the EPC services, and we provide the electrolysis equipment. And to date, Linde have been working very closely with us. So you have to make a distinction between Linde Gas and Linde Engineering, but we work exclusively with Linde Engineering on the EPC, and they buy from us the modules on the same basis.
Okay. How does this Scandia decision to use battery instead of hydrogen affect ITM or your future prospects, if it does?
Yeah, I mean, batteries are used where batteries are felt most appropriate, and hydrogen where hydrogen is felt most appropriate. So batteries will find a market in mobility, and so will hydrogen. Batteries will find market in grid balancing, and so will hydrogen. There are certain applications where one has an advantage over the other. Certainly for small vehicles, plug-in electric vehicles are certainly an option and are being rolled out. For heavier vehicles, where traction and weight and range and refueling time are important, most companies are now looking at hydrogen, and certainly buses, trucks and trains are being rolled out by OEMs. And if you look at stationary grid balancing, if you want energy storage for half an hour or an hour, you would buy a battery. And if you want energy storage for more than an hour, certainly above 3 hours to multiple days or even seasons, the only way of doing it is by using green hydrogen. So, it's not going to be, the future will have in it supercapacitors, batteries, flow cells, electrolyzers, and hydrogen. It will have all of those technologies, and they'll have different markets and different applications.
Okay. Here's a good one. In simple terms, what is ITM's main technological competitive advantage?
Main technological, it's a range of things. It's 20 years experience, 20 years detailed R&D, testing capacity, being able to, because we manufacture everything, being able to ring all of the changes. So pull all of the levers that you need so that you can change the cost structure, the lifetime, the performance. So 20 years of understanding how you do all of those things. It's manufacturing capacity, and having spent 2 years developing the world's largest, but the world's most effective manufacturing space for electrolysis. It's about having reference plant. It's about having great worldwide partnerships. It's about having an EPC contractor who is the world leader, and that Linde is the world leader in the area. And it's also about having access to capital and being listed on the London stock market and having great enthusiasm from the capital markets for green hydrogen. So I don't know, there's about 5 things there, but it's all of those things. And if you don't have them all together, if you only have 1 or 2 of them, you're not going to make it.
Okay. A couple of financial questions from Richard. What are your return on capital employed projections, and when is the company going to make a commercial return on its investment?
Yeah, so Andy might want to dig into that. I think we've already talked about when we go cash flow positive. Return on investment, I guess what you're talking about is either the investment in a factory or investments in refueling equipment through ITM Motive. But look, Andy, do you want to jump in here and talk about rates of return?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So in terms of an electrolyzer used for Motive, we've got you would expect a double-digit IRR from a station with a base load of large vehicles like buses. So that looks very healthy. In terms of a factory like Bessemer Park, the actual fit out and equipment, Bessemer Park will have cost about £14 million in total. The next factory, we've actually put slightly more in for that, and that can generate a gigawatt's worth of product per annum. So the payback looks pretty good for a factory. It's that there's an awful lot of work and 20 years of experience building to this point that has been invested.
Okay.
And I think in terms of break even or a commercial return, again, the consensus is saying 2024.
Thanks, Andy. A couple of questions from Alan. What is the success ratio for tenders so far? And a smart follow-up. If you're unsuccessful in the tender process, is there any common reason behind that?
Yeah, so it's very difficult to assess what the conversion ratio is. And actually what we find is that some projects come straight through. So that making that assessment is very difficult. I think we'll be able to judge that better as time goes on. I think the visibility in our revenues is certainly increasing. I think there's a consensus developing in the market across all of those analysts that Andy had mentioned. But there's no clear answer to that question right now.
And what about where you're unsuccessful? Are there any common themes?
There are a number of different themes. Not something I particularly want to discuss in a public call.
Are you going to stick with sole manufacturing capabilities for your stack designs, or will you ever look at entering into a licensing model?
Yeah, we're a manufacturer. I don't believe in licensing technology like electrolysis or batteries or fuel cells or any of those types of devices in the early stages. I think when you get into manufacturing, you learn a hell of a lot. There's a lot of know-how that comes out of the manufacturing, and we're into a continuous development process. And you can license your technology too early, you can teach too much too early, and you can allow licensees to make improvements which then create difficulties in terms of IP for you going forwards. So to me, that doesn't seem like a good solution.
Okay. Given the increasing number of cyber attacks, are you positioned, or is your IT supplier positioned to defend the company against such attacks?
Yeah, I mean, we have an IT company that we work very closely with. We have a head of IT now, Lindsay, who's very, very good. We all of the precautions that you would imagine from a company like ITM are in place. Governments get cyber attacked, and governments have, and large international companies get cyber attacked. So I don't think our standards are good for the industry, and we'll continue to keep up with the standards as more technology is developed. But I don't feel that that's a risk on the business at all.
Okay, what is the current price of a 10 megawatt turnkey electrolyzer? That's a question from Mustafa.
It's a bit less than 0.8 million euros a megawatt. So for 10 megawatts, 8 million. 0.8 million euros a megawatt.
Question from Mohit. Do you plan to raise more funds? Sorry. Question from Mohit. Do you plan to raise more funds in 2021?
Yeah, I think we don't need more funds right now. Depends what opportunities come our way. But actually answering the question, are we going to raise more funding, is the answer to a price-sensitive question, which wouldn't be appropriate.
Okay. Question from Jean-Baptiste. Could you give us more color about how you expect the development of your backlog versus your tender pipeline? He's trying to better understand why the backlog was flat sequentially. Was this because customers have been delaying orders?
Yeah, I mean, what is important to realize, Jean-Baptiste, hi. What's important to realize is that orders as they come in are now big orders. We made got an order, preferred supplier order from Snam, 100 megawatts all in one go. So what you will see is the orders coming in a very lumpy way. You won't see a gradual increase. There'll be a gradual underlying increase combined with significant orders in lumps. And I think that's the way you have to think about the business developing.
Okay. Factory-related question. Which part of production uses the clean rooms?
We make our own and coat our own electrodes, membranes. You need a clean room for assembly, and there's a number of other processes that we go through, which are clean processes as well. I mean, we don't really discuss what our manufacturing process is. That's something that we tend to remain confidential.
Okay. Question from Nathan. Any signs of collaborations with gas distributors in the UK, such as the SGN with the H100 project?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of projects that we are collaborating with already. I think a Scotia Gas Networks project is a great project. It was funded centrally from Ofgem, as was High Deploy. We work, of course, with Cadent and Northern Gas Networks. But we're in discussion with all of the gas network operators in the UK. So that's not only Northern Gas Networks and Cadent and SGN, but also Wales and West Utilities. So there's an intense amount of activity in the UK, readying for the announcement from the UK government about the hydrogen strategy, which should come at the end of Q1 or the beginning of Q2 of this year. And that will include gas grid injection, it will include contracts for difference auctions, it will include comments on the RTFO and so on. So there's a whole portfolio of stuff coming.
Okay, few questions from Adam. Can you give a view on CapEx outlook post Bessemer Park, but ahead of a second plant? Can we expect some savings if you do when you go for a second plant, or will it be broadly the same as this one? And where were the main COVID-19 bottlenecks? Was it on site or in the supply chains?
Yeah, so
it's on site. I mean, please, Andy.
Yeah, so the COVID bottlenecks were really on site. You can see that we've been operating and we continue to operate in the production facilities, and we operate longer shifts so that we can be COVID secure, both in Bessemer Park and at other sites. But really, it's getting out to client sites to complete commissioning work that has been really challenging in the last 6 months. In terms of the CapEx profile, we've got another £4 million in H2 to spend on Bessemer Park equipment. And then you'll see a relatively flat profile, apart from business as usual CapEx, until we get to the next factory. The only difference to that is the refueling stations, where as ITM Motive make an announcement of having won a refueling station, then there will be CapEx associated with that.
Okay. How much of your pipeline, if any, will go through partners other than Linde? And will sub 10 megawatt products be a major contributor to your revenues?
Yeah, sorry, Andy, you carry on.
I was just going to say, the mix is going to change over time. So we can see that ILE deploying over 10 megawatts kit is going to form more and more importantly a part of our backlog in the future. In the next 2 or 3 years, there's going to be a mix between the two types of products. Graham, I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, that's all right. I was going to say something very similar, Andy.
Who are the main competitors? Who are your main competitors, and how do your prices compare with theirs? Okay,
so competitors would be divided broadly into alkaline electrolyzers and PEM electrolyzers. I wouldn't want to talk specifically about particular companies. That doesn't tend to be a fair thing to do. I think that one of the things behind the question is probably how does our cost structure compare with the cost structure of alkaline electrolyzers? Alkaline electrolyzers have been down the cost curve over the last 100 years. Over the last decade or so, there's been a cost convergence, particularly over the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years, between alkaline electrolyzers and PEM electrolyzers. And I think now what you have is all the advantages of PEM electrolyzers, but you have now a cost convergence. And I think now what you'll see is as PEM electrolyzers develop in volume of production, that PEM electrolyzers will actually become lower cost than alkaline electrolyzers. But today, the costs are comparable. And we see that through the tendering activity that we're going through. Of course, with a PEM electrolyzer, you have rapid response. You make high pressure hydrogen and it's clean. And what you have to do is compare the costs of the full system, including all of the balance of plant.
Okay. Question from Anne. Thinking about the 24 megawatt project in Germany, will the hydrogen produced be used as a chemical reagent or as an energy source? And follow up, are you using renewable energy at all to power the equipment at the new factory?
Yeah, we work with Ørsted, and actually we have a renewable energy contract with Ørsted. We work closely with Ørsted as well, as it said in the announcement, when we're procuring energy for our refueling stations. In Germany, the supplier of the electricity hasn't yet been announced. The hydrogen is being used by Linde for a variety of applications. And actually, as those applications increase, so both industrial and at transport applications, then there is potential for that electrolyzer site to expand further.
Question from Colin. Do you have a broad timeline on when the new 5 megawatt unit might be finalized?
Yeah, we are actually now bidding very large scale projects. So that means above 50 megawatts and certainly 100 megawatt scale plants are being bid with the 5 megawatt unit. And we would be expecting to deliver on a 5 megawatt unit into a project in the 18-month to 2-year timescale.
Okay. What's the outlook projection for hydrogen refueling station over the next 3 years?
Yeah, so we've formed a division called ITM Motive that will be focusing all of its activities on buses and trucks and trains, so heavy transport. All of our existing refueling stations are being transferred into that division. The new MD has been appointed, and we are working closely with the UK government on the development of the strategy for rolling out buses and trucks, and also trains, but additionally also for aviation and shipping. So there's much more will be revealed about what the UK government's plans are, and we're part of defining that end of Q1, beginning of Q2, when the UK government announces its hydrogen strategy.
Question from Kurt. A Norwegian-based manufacturer is saying that PEM electrolyzers are more suitable and in use for small electrolyzers of 20 megawatts and below, and that alkaline electrolyzers are more suitable for big stuff. What's your take on that? And when do you think we'll see the first 100 megawatt PEM electrolyzers?
Yeah, I've heard that said. It's normally said by companies that own alkaline electrolyzer technology. And it's not said by those who own PEM electrolyzer technology. And to date, you haven't seen a PEM electrolyzer manufacturer procuring either technology or a company that owns alkaline, but you have seen alkaline electrolyzer companies buying PEM electrolyzer technology. So I don't agree.
How are the projects mixing hydrogen in Kiel and the Northeast progressing? Are they going to be extended or incorporated permanently into the energy system?
Yeah, so the trials are ongoing at Kiel. Our electrolyzer ticks away, injecting hydrogen to 20% level into the gas grid in Kiel. And all of the inhabitants of that university campus are using the energy gas with 20% hydrogen in it without even knowing. And it's decarbonizing all of their end user devices. The next trial is in the open network, that is with Cadent and Northern Gas Networks. And that's progressing. I think there was a press release recently from Northern Gas Networks about that first trial. You will have noticed from Boris's 10-point plan, also the development of a hydrogen village, town and city. And actually all of the boiler companies in the UK, most notably Worcester Bosch and Baxi, are looking at developing 100% hydrogen ready boilers that can use admixtures. So starting from 0% and dialing all the way up to 100%. So there's a lot of progress in the area. But specifically answering your question, over the next year are the open network trials.
Okay, on the after sales support and service, do you have a specific contract length for those contracts?
No, it's whatever the customer wants. I mean, we look after, we in general, our equipment comes with a standard warranty of 1 to 2 years, depending on what the customer wants, and then an after-sales support contract. Typically, they're 5 years, but they can be out to 10 years.
What's the life of your stack product, and are there any end-of-life obligations?
Yeah, I mean, we look after the stacks, and we charge 3% per annum to do that. You know, we've had stacks running for very, very long periods of time. That's the test data that I referred to earlier as being part of our competitive advantage. So when a customer wants to buy a piece of equipment and they're looking at a piece of energy equipment, they look at cost, performance, and lifetime, and they are 3 axes that they use to assess the total cost of ownership. And it depends how you operate the electrolyzer and what current density you specify the electrolyzer at. But the short answer is we look after the electrolyzer based on that 3% per annum charge. And that's how we worked out the charge, to make sure that after-sales support contracts make a positive contribution to the bottom line.
And in terms of end-of-life obligations?
End-of-life obligations, well, would be a contractual issue. But if we have an after-sales support contract that lasts 5 years, then at the end of 5 years, we decide what we're going to do. We might want to buy the equipment back, or the customer might want to keep it.
Okay. As you scale up production in the factory, are there any areas or components in the supply chain that could cause bottlenecks? And if there are there any steps you can take to mitigate these?
Yeah, all of the components we use in different ways are used in industry already, and we don't see any supply chain risks.
What are the key operational milestones for H2, for the second half of the year?
Key operational milestones for H2. Sorry, second half.
Not hydrogen.
Yeah. Look, I'm sorry. Yeah. So for us, this is all about converting quotations to orders and delivering on orders which are already under contract. So for us now, it's all about delivery. It's about delivery. It's about revenue recognition. And the key thing for ITM Power now, over the next few years, is to increase volume, decrease costs, get to market share, and achieve cash flow positive. And we're absolutely focused on doing that.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your partnership with National Express?
Yeah, so the Birmingham bus refueling station, 3 megawatts in size. The project was developed in collaboration with Birmingham City Council. The operator of the buses is National Express, and National Express have ordered 20 buses, which are being delivered. They start to arrive in the middle of this year, and we have agreed a fuel contract with National Express, and it is our first bus refueling fuel contract. And you will see much more about announcements from ITM Power and National Express jointly when the first buses arrive.
Is carbon capture and storage a viable alternative to green hydrogen, or is it just a distraction?
Yeah, I think it's a distraction. My view of blue hydrogen, or so-called carbon capture and storage, is that it is oil and gas business as usual. And that the oil and gas industry want to continue to use their methane infrastructure. And actually, methane is 80 times as bad a greenhouse gas as CO2. I would also say that when you do CCS and you store huge amounts of CO2 in depleted oil fields off the coast of the UK, a very important question is who takes the liability for those? Because we have 800 terawatt hours of energy flowing through our gas grid. If you remove the CO2 from all of that natural gas and store it under the sea, every year the liability increases. And I say to many colleagues in the city, would you want to invest in an oil and gas company that have that kind of liability on its balance sheet? So my view is that green hydrogen will be lower cost than blue hydrogen, actually in only a few years' time. And any blue hydrogen schemes that are developed will be stranded assets.
Could you give us an update on the Refine project, the Shell project, please?
Yeah, sure. So Refine has had some slight delays due to COVID. We will be getting into first hydrogen at the end of this quarter. I'd say the key thing to say is that Shell are delighted with the project. We've worked together incredibly closely over the last couple of years on the project. It is the headline project in Germany for green hydrogen. It will be the largest operational green hydrogen electrolyzer in Germany prior to us going live with the Leuna project. And we have a very, very happy customer in Shell.
Question from Dawn. What kind of components have you built up in inventory? What kind of components are these?
Yeah, I mean, the components we'll be building up in inventory, you can see them over, this shoulder. What you see there is a 2.1 megawatt module, and those 2.1 megawatt modules will be holding as inventory so we can build them into 10 megawatt and above installations. And that means that the delivery time is far less than it used to be, in fact, less than 8 months. And of course, we'll be doing the same with the 5 megawatt modules as well.
Okay. Can you shed more light, please, on the opportunities you think will arise from direct hydrogen generation in offshore wind turbines or nearby floating platforms? Yeah,
I mean, the Oyster project is all about looking at marinizing the electrolyzer so it can deal with sea spray and could go offshore. One of the rationales that is being looked at is using existing offshore oil platforms and repurposing them for electrolysis. And one of the reasons for doing that, of course, is that they have a pipe that goes from the platform to the mainland. So you could actually run wind turbines, you could generate hydrogen offshore, and you would be able to transport the energy back without the need to buy a cable. That's longer term. Actually, nearer term is using the same principles of integration of the wind with the electrolyzer, but doing that onshore. And also the integration of the desalination units as well, because there are many places around the world where you might want to get your water from seawater. So the potential for offshore wind and offshore development of green hydrogen, I think, is strong in the long term, but is not the preferred model in the short term.
Okay. Another question from Alan. Can you talk about the company's IP portfolio and whether you are continuing to file patents?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of know-how in ITM Power. I mean, the fundamental principles of electrolysis and PEM electrolyzers, and particularly older forms of electrolyzers, those patents are years out of date now. We have a portfolio of intellectual property, but you can overstate what patents do. I've seen companies in the past that have invested a fortune in intellectual property. It's massively increased their burn rate, and actually does little for the products that are being deployed. So there's a portfolio. I think it starts with know-how. It's also about continuous improvement, but it's also experience in the field. It's also about speed to market, and it's also about having a brand and reference plant. That's all of those things, really.
Question from Gunther. Are you concerned about competition from solid oxide fuel cell electrolyzers because of their 85% efficiency?
Yeah, 85% efficiency. I mean, anyone would know that wasn't true. So first of all, the theoretical efficiency of an electrochemical machine is 84% and a Carnot cycle 67%. So what a high temperature solid oxide electrolyzer does is it uses steam at 150 degrees C. It uses process heat. So the first question you might want to ask is the efficiency you're being quoted an electrical efficiency or an overall energy efficiency? In other words, does it include the thermal inefficiencies of raising the steam? Now, if you raise steam, that's a Carnot cycle, which is 67% efficiency at maximum. Most steam raising plants are about 30% efficient. So question one, where do you get the steam from? Number two, how do you raise that steam and what's the efficiency of it? And number three, is the efficiency that you're quoting overall energy efficiency? And I think your view would be modified when you ask those questions.
Question from Thomas M.
The other point, let me just add one thing. I have quite a long history in fuel cells. It goes back more than 30 years now. I did a lot of work in solid oxide fuel cells. And I can tell you that if you add steam to a steel fuel cell, that you will have corrosion problems and differential thermal expansion problems. So I think there's a considerable amount of in-field trials that are needed and development that's needed before solid oxide high temperature electrolysis finds a market. And the problem with it is that you have to find a market that includes waste heat that's made renewably. And I think that's actually very difficult.
Okay, question from Thomas. Can you give an indication of how much of your pipeline is bidding for applications in which both PEM and alkaline solutions are applicable versus tenders specifically for PEM?
Yeah, some companies tender specifically for PEM. They do that because they want rapid response, and they do it because they want rapid response and high pressure. Many just tender for all of them. Or both of them, but we meet both approaches. Certainly, you tend to find that renewable energy companies would go down the PEM route, but certainly they like to test the market by tendering for both types.
Simon, just conscious of time, perhaps we've got time for one more question, if possible, just before we give investors a chance for feedback.
Right, let me pick one. There are quite a lot of them. Would you ever consider buying any other companies or technologies to add to what you've got? And if yes, in what field would you do so?
Yeah, so the first thing to say is we're a very focused company. We're focusing on the manufacturing of PEM electrolysis equipment right now. We're working with our EPC partner for deployment. So that's the first point to make. If we did consider doing that, it's not something that I could announce publicly. That would be a piece of price-sensitive information. Are we actively looking at growth by acquisition rather than organic growth? I can tell you some other companies have made announcements that they are. That is not an announcement that we have made.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Cooley, and thank you very much, Simon, for hosting those questions. You have addressed a great number of the questions received today, especially due to the number of attendees and the questions that we have had come through. The company will, of course, review all the questions submitted today and publish responses where appropriate to do so on the Investor Meet Company platform. Dr. Cooley, perhaps I could just ask you for a couple of final words just before I redirect attendees for some feedback, please.
Yeah, certainly. I can look up from the screen now because I don't need to look at the chat. But first of all, thank you very much for coming and thank you for your interest in ITM Power. The most important thing to say is what's going on behind me. And that's why we decided to do the presentation from the factory. It's been an amazing year for ITM Power. We moved into the world's largest electrolyzer factory. We just announced the sale of the world's largest PEM electrolyzer. We're working with Shell, with Linde, and with Snam. But I think most importantly, we're in an amazing market. It's a market that's growing incredibly rapidly. It's at huge scale, and we intend to be one of the most important players in the market. So thank you very much for your interest in ITM Power.
That's fantastic. Thank you again to all the ITM Power team for updating investors today. Can I ask investors not to close the sessions? You will be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback. If you've accessed the meeting from our website, the feedback page will appear in front of you. If you've accessed it via the link sent to you in the email, if you wouldn't mind just logging back in, it takes just a couple of seconds and your feedback is greatly received by the company. So on behalf of ITM Power PLC, we'd like to thank you very much for attending today's session. That concludes today's event. Thank you all very much indeed.